Hey everyone, it's Benitez here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing episode 1 of my WTF series known as What the Flow. So in today's episode, what I will be covering is a beginner level topic and the differences between a Dynamics 365 connector and a CDS connector. So over the left hand side, these are the triggers that you can select in terms of a Dynamics 365 connector. And over on the right hand side is the common data service connectors that you can select as the triggers for Flow. Now you'll notice that there is a label of premium and you're probably wondering, what does this mean? So there's another MVP in our community, Andrew, who wrote a blog post, and I'll just switch over to his blog post now. So basically he describes that premium connectors can only be used by Flow Plan 1 and Flow Plan 2 licenses. And in terms of the functionality, in terms of what's the difference, this is what I'll go through next. So back in my PowerPoint side, I have the side where I've got a screenshot of Dynamics 365 workflow, and down here you notice that I've got the scope field displayed. And in Flow, the scope can be set in a CDS connector, but it cannot be set in a Dynamics 365 connector. So if you do require creating a flow that needs to run in the context of the user in terms of the owner of the flow, or users within the same business unit of the owner of the flow, then you need to use a CDS connector versus a Dynamics 365 connector. So in this table, I've got an overview of what I'll be showing you next in terms of how the flow executes. So let's jump straight into it. Alright, so I'm going to open up my flow environment, and the flow that I'm going to show you at first is the one that has the Dynamics 365 connector. So my trigger is when a record is created in my Dynamics 365 dev instance against a case, it's going to go ahead and check some conditions before it will go and create a task. Now I will go through these steps in my upcoming episodes of my WTF series, so do stay tuned. But today I'll pretty much be covering the difference between the two connectors. Okay, so now that I've explained what that flow does, I'm gonna go into my unified interface in terms of Customer Service Hub and create a case. So this flow will automatically execute because it's running in the context of me as a user, and because a scope cannot be set, it will always be executed organization wide. So now when we go back to our flow, and if we hit the refresh button a few times, we will see that the flow has been executed. And here it is over here. And when you open up a flow, you'll be able to see the successful path that the flow has gone through. So it's saying that it's passed this criteria up here, the condition as well as the action. Okay, so I'm going to jump into my advanced finds that I have open. So this is just showing you that the case has been created. And when we go to the task advanced find, we will now see that the task has been created. Okay, so the next scenario that I'm showing you is triggering that flow when a different user creates their case in Dynamics 365, and because no scope is set, it will go ahead and execute, and we will see the task create as well. Alright, so that has been created under Aaron Rodgers, and if we go back into my flow, we will see the flow execute. So here it is. So that's my flow that has been created. we'll go back to Advanced Find. We'll see that the case has been created, and we will also now see the task. So in terms of the Dynamics 365 connector, when using it as a trigger, it will execute organization-wide. So now what I'm going to show you next is setting the scope in a CDS connector. Okay, so going back to flow, I'm going to disable this flow. So I'm going to switch this flow off, and I'm going to enable this flow here. Okay, now when we go into this flow where I have selected a CDS connector as a trigger, you can see that the scope can now be set. So I had set this to organization, but I'm going to now set it to user. So what's going to happen is if I, as the owner of the flow, creates a new case in Dynamics 365, that flow will execute because it recognizes that me as a user creating this. And if we go back into the flow, the other thing that I've noticed when using a CDS connector, and this is something that Bruce had pointed out when we were chatting on Twitter, that his colleague, Lachlan Wright, who also has a blog, which I will link in the YouTube description below, discovered that when using a CDS connector, it tends to execute faster than a Dynamics 365 Dynamics 365 flow connector, and yeah, I'd have to agree. I'd say it's more instant than the Dynamics 365 connector. Anyways, so this task has now created against me as the owner of the flow. Now, if we went into the other browser window that I have open as Aaron Rodgers, and now when we create this case, that flow is not going to execute because flow will recognize that Aaron is not the owner of the flow. So it works similar to how we're used to in Dynamics 365. So the same principles apply in Flow when you set the scope when using a CDS connector. So even as I refresh this, we're never going to see the flow execute. And so we can see the case has been created in here, but then when I go into my task Advanced Find, we'll never see that task get created because Aaron is not the owner of the flow and the scope has been set to execute as the user. Alright, so the next scenario that I will show you next is setting the scope to business unit. Okay, so we're changing from user to business unit, and I'll hit save. Cool. Alright, so Aaron Rodgers, he's in a different business unit to Eliza, and then we have the CE admin who's also in the same business unit as Eliza. So let's go back into Aaron's browser window and we will create another case. Okay, so we go back into here and we hit refresh. We'll see that the flow has not executed, which is good. The scope is being applied, and now I'm back in my task Advanced Find, and as I'm refreshing I can't see a task, so the flow hasn't executed, so the task hasn't been created. Now I'm going to open up Firefox because now I'm logged in as CE admin who's in the same business unit as Eliza, and create a new case. Because CE admin is in the same business unit, we'll see that the flow has executed. And now when we refresh cases and the task, we'll see that the task has been created. Woohoo! Okay, that's exactly what we want. Alright, so then the last scenario that was in my table back in the PowerPoint slide is when you set the scope to organization, which is what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to set this now to organization, hit save, go back into Erin, and we'll create the last case to demonstrate the different scenarios. Alright, so we're back in Flow, and I'm going to refresh my browser, and we'll see that the flow has executed. And so here's my case, and when I hit refresh, we shall see the task as well. Ta-da! Okay, so in terms of the scenarios that I showed you just then, it was exactly what I had in this table. So just to recap, when you are using a Dynamics 365 connector, it will always run organization-wide no matter what, because the scope cannot be defined. Now, if you are using the CDS connector where you do have the appropriate flow plan license, you can set the scope, and the scope that you're already familiar with in Dynamics 365 workflows can be applied as well. So as part of episode 1, it is educating you and understanding how you can set the scope for flow in the same way that you're familiar with in Dynamics 365 workflows already, and that is through using a CDS connector. Otherwise, the option that you have, if you don't have the required licensing, is using the Dynamics 365 connector, but you cannot set the scope. And yeah, that is it for today's episode. In my next episode, I will be covering how to do and or statements in a condition in Flow. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I hope you learned something from me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Turn up. Let's go.